Hello and welcome to VideoNet's series of IBC 2016 interviews. I'm Barry Flynn, contributing editor at VideoNet, and with me I have Peter MacAvock, the newly elected chairman of the digital TV standards body DVB, formerly head of delivery platforms and services at the EBU Technology and Innovation Division, and before that, of course, executive director back at DVB for 14 years, which is a long time. Peter, you've been around the digital TV industry since its inception, so no man is better placed to pronounce on its future, in my view. What do you see, as it were, helicopter eye view of the broad trends in the sector going forwards?
So indeed, as you pointed out, Barry, I've been around a long time, some would say too long. But I was around at the start of the DVB project when the B was all about broadcasting and all about transferring that broadcast market from analog to digital. That's happened in Europe, less so in some of the Asian countries where DVB is popular. That will happen throughout. The B broadcasting business that's at the center of IBC, the B in IBC also, is changing. I mean, we have the rise of OTT, we have the rise of the app-based environment, we have the proliferation of mobile devices. We have a changing mindset within the broadcasters themselves. Some of them, indeed one of the Nordic broadcasters has actually stated publicly that they are transitioning from a linear TV first and linear radio first to online first producer. So they produce first for online and then convert that to linear media. Big step, huge changes in workflows required, but this is what's happening in the industry. Now, DVB necessarily has to address the various requirements that come into it, and at the moment we're dealing with, the streaming issues associated with the delivery of UHD over streamed services. We're dealing with the UHD standards themselves, and hopefully we'll have a solution by the end of the year there. And we're also dealing with things like the future of terrestrial broadcasting and how can we better serve customers on different types of devices. So these are all issues that the DVB project faces now. But what we need to try and do is, no matter how disparate these problems appear and unconnected these problems appear, is to provide some form of a coherent vision for a future within the project where all the members can sign up and find themselves within the different work streams. It's a great group of people working in the DVB project. Everybody's there. All the stakeholders were there in '93. All the stakeholders are there now. They might be slightly different stakeholders and slightly different individuals, but the key guys are there. And we certainly have the ingredients with which to approach a future where broadcasting is not as simple as it was before, but it's something we're looking forward to do.
So, so you mean that what you're needing to do is to kind of, well, spread out and spread out, but not fragment the organisation, because there are so many different things to do that you want them to have reasonable autonomy, but not be too dirigiste.
Yes. So, I mean, there's no point in me having a view because I'm not going to do all the work. What we need to do is build a coherent plan where each of the individual members can find themselves in that plan and can contribute to the work going forward. The background to all this is, and why I'm even considering doing this, is because the EBU members felt it was very important to ensure that the EBU was very active within the DVB project, and also that the DVB project is too important an organisation to not be heavily involved in. All the stakeholders are there, they've been there for years, they continue to be there, the business is changing, the stakeholders remain the same, and as that moves, it's like a mishmash of organisations, but everybody's there. And DVB is where it's going to happen. We just need to make sure that it happens in such a way as to meet the market requirements as best as possible.
Okay. So you and I have had conversations in the past about the possibility of a global digital TV standard, and you talked about that a bit in yesterday's press conference, but also whether it was possible to kind of bridge this gap in standards between the TV and mobile sectors, and I guess what I interpreted you to say in the press conference was sort of that there's not been an enormous amount of action going on in the global standardization project. What about the TV and mobile sectors one? I mean, where does mobile broadcasting fit in?
Right.
And is there do we need something? Does there need to be a rapprochement, or are we all happy with our respective ways of handling mobile devices on the one hand and broadcast devices on the other?
So, very good question, and unfortunately there's a couple of layers of an answer. The first layer is mobile telecommunication standards have, up until now, been mobile telecommunication standards, very good for the delivery of voice, although in some cases not so great, but there you go, and data. And we've seen a merging of the voice and the data functions within the telecommunications industry. That has been quite successful, and we have a set of 4G LTE standards which have been very successful, and a set of companies, the telecommunications companies, who are generating enormous amounts of revenue from you and I and every man in the street. And that has led to a continued push on spectrum in the DTT frame. And there is a view held by some that DTT's functions could be taken over by perhaps a different model, but a model based on mobile telecommunications infrastructure and standards. So the DVB project doesn't subscribe to that view. The members of the DVB project don't subscribe to that view, but there is a view out there that that could be possible. Enter 5G, and 5G, if somebody can tell me what 5G is, I will buy that man a beer.
I was hoping you'd tell me.
The answer is I don't know, but we have two options. One is to sit back and wait and let somebody else tell us what 5G is, and I'm sure the telecommunications operators would have a view as to what 5G is. The broadcast operators would have a view to what 5G is. The washing machine manufacturers would have a view as to what 5G is, and those views would all be different. So somewhere that standardization exercise will play out, and with my day job hat on, the EBU is involved in the standardization process for 5G, but there is also a very important process in the DVB project regarding what are the next challenges for the digital terrestrial television market and the wireless delivery of long-form, high-quality media, otherwise known as broadcast content. And that'll play out. We have challenges. One of them is how to target these mobile devices that you describe. There are two ways of doing that. One is to encourage the mobile sector to incorporate broadcast receivers into their devices. There has been some success in the radio domain, there's been some success in the TV domain, but these are not ubiquitous devices, far from it. And another thread, complementary, is to ensure that you can provide a mechanism of the transfer of broadcast content onto Wi-Fi networks, onto other wireless networks. The in-home SAT-IP equivalent for a DVB, a global DVB set of standards. So we're working very closely with the SAT-IP group in order to facilitate that process. It's relatively easy for video and audio, but again, with the broadcaster's hat on, it's a lot more than that, and it gets more complicated when you start dealing with access services and you start dealing with things like HBB TV content and whatever else. So that process will follow its course. The other process of trying to identify and promote the use of broadcast standards within mobile devices will proceed. But the bottom line is the core business of the broadcast community remains the large screen. That is slowly shifting, but we don't see any diminution of the importance. People are watching more content on more devices, but they're not really watching any less content on that big screen. And that's something we have to respect. So it's called great and fun talking about mobile devices, but let's not forget where the bread and butter is.
Okay.
And I would just add one more point to this process. The DVB project, in terms of how it might deal globally, is very important because we have standardization institutions in the United States, ATSC, and we have standardization institutions in Japan, ARIBE, and we have the equivalent processes in China and elsewhere, and Brazil in particular. So there's an organization called FOBTV, the Future of Broadcast Television, which has been largely inactive over the last few years. It has a new chair, a chap called Lynn Claudy from NAB, very popular and able man. And we will take part actively in that process. Not to generate a new standard, but rather to work with the other standardizations bodies to coordinate carefully amongst ourselves, because the consumer electronics industry is global. The industry that supplies each of the broadcasters is a global industry. So we need to be aware that there needs to be good coordination among the standardization bodies.
Okay, excellent. Quick question to end with, possibly because the answer might be no, but is there anything you can share with us about the conclusions of this VR study group?
No. In a tiny bit more detail, the issue with VR is that it is extremely complicated in terms of the various facets of the problem. It's 3D multiplied by a factor of 10. The question is it too early to start work in this area? Is there work to be done to the benefit of the broadcast community? There's a variety of things, as you may have heard, in terms of the suitability of a rather short form of content rather than the traditional longer form content. The issue about motion sickness and what that entails. And we see with most of the headsets that I've seen anyway have health warnings associated with them. Again, with a public service broadcaster's hat on, we can never be accused of causing ill to our consumers. So we need to be extremely careful as DVB as we go about any standardization in that area. But the bottom line is we need to ensure that standards do appear if and when required, and hopefully before they are required. So will there be work done? Hard to say at this particular point. I would say probably yes. So that's why I can't really say for certain that we're definitely going to enter into standardization process there.
Okay, great. Thanks very much for that, Peter. I think that's all we've got time for at the moment. So I'd like to thank Peter for this interview with VideoNet at our IBC 2016 video interview series. And thank you, the audience, for listening and tuning in. From me, Barry Flynn, and from Peter MacAvock, it's goodbye.